the indictment down in Texas, the indictment of these Antifa members, because there's something in that indictment that I feel like people haven't fully comprehended the implications of the fact that there are unindicted co-conspirators named in that indictment of the Antifa member who opened fire at the ICE facility. Unindicted co-conspirators. That means some of these Antifa militants flipped and are talking to the feds. Yeah. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but I want to unpack the origin of this anarchist book fair, because we got to know where this stuff, who's setting it up, who's paying for it, who's behind it.
Yeah, and I don't know that we fully know the answers to all of that. They say that they rely a lot on community donations for it, and they've been having this for years, by the way. In fact, I just went and pulled up, because I saw it yesterday, a 2016 article from the Seattle Times talking about the annual anarchist book fair. And of course, the headline is hilarious. It's at anarchist book fair, history, literature, and low-key activism. A day at Seattle's anarchist book fair brought literature, lectures, lots of people helping each other, a little girl shooting a crossbow, and only one person willing to speak on the record. So it's been totally washed by the mainstream media for a long time. I think the key to trying to start to uncover and unravel who's paying for it probably starts with the Vera Project, which again is a nonprofit organization providing the space on multiple occasions for anarchists to host their book fair there. And they do get from the Arts Commission, I believe, in the state of Washington, some taxpayer funding. And so once you start to demand to know essentially what is the purpose of that taxpayer funding, what sort of events are they supposed to be holding there, and you try to hold the Vera Project accountable, right? Because if they rented the space, somebody paid the bill, right, at the Vera Project, unless they did it for free. They had some sort of connection, contact at the Vera Project. So now the Vera Project, because it's a nonprofit organization, it gets taxpayer funds. There's more leverage there to get information from there about who were they connecting with, who did they talk to, who, if anyone, paid them, who was the organizer. And I would encourage the FBI to do that. We know, and I think, as you pointed out, the most effective way for the FBI and the DOJ to get to the bottom of what's going on is to find out where the money is coming from and to stop the flow of money. So, you know, and I've listed publicly and also behind the scenes after my visit to the White House some organizations that I think the FBI should look into. And some of them, frankly, Liz, are mainstream. In Washington state, to me, and look, I'm not accusing them of being domestic terrorists, just so neither of us get sued, but there's a huge coincidence with a lot of these left-wing extremists turning out to be not only public school teachers, but members or leadership within the teachers' unions. And so one of a list that I've given as people who they need to look into whether they're funding these organizations, the Washington Education Association and the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington. I really believe that there is some money going from place to place that ultimately ends up in the hands of people who are committing acts of political violence.
I think that's doubly shocking when you find out that it's, I mean, the word you used, I think, accurately describes it, that these are somewhat mainstream organizations. It's not like the John Brown Gun Club and the Socialist Rifle Association and Armed Queers, which 2 months ago you probably never heard of. And as soon as you look at your website, you're like, yeah, they're whack jobs who are about to commit violence. But this stuff is like mainstream. I have confidence in the Trump administration, which we'll talk about in just a couple minutes, exactly where they need to start to dismantle these radical trans networks, because they're embedded pretty deeply into our cities, into our culture right now. This is not something that's particularly new. It's not something that that's going to be rooted out easily, although it can be done. And so we're going to talk about some steps the Trump administration is going to take. But I want to ask you about this indictment in Texas. So on July 4th, a man named Benjamin Song opened fire at an ICE facility in Alvarado, Texas. Benjamin Song was a member of both the John Brown Gun Club and the Socialist Rifle Association. He was indicted on terrorism charges for this shooting at the ICE facility. In the indictment, if you read it really closely, and like I said before, I think that this has actually not been picked up on by our side as much as it should be, because this is pretty significant. In this indictment, it's mentioned that there are unindicted co-conspirators, which essentially means there are people who were associated who, if they stood trial, may have been found guilty, but instead they struck a deal with the feds and said, hey, we'll tell you stuff if you don't prosecute us for it. I find that to be really interesting, Brandi. I wonder your take on it, because if you can get some of these Antifa militants to spill the beans on the organizational structure, then the FBI's job becomes much easier.
Yeah, this goes back to what we talked about earlier about sheep, right? And some people being, below average intelligence and just clinging on to a movement for a sense of belonging, I think, in a lot of instances. And that's what I've characterized a lot of these, like what's happening in Portland. A big chunk of them are sort of loners, some of them even homeless people who've drifted into the camp just for a place to belong. And you almost feel a little bad for them because they're encouraged into violence, or they're quick to violence because of this mob mentality and this sheep mentality. So a couple things. A lot of these people, we talk about Antifa A team, B team, and then like D team. So there's a segment of the radical left and these Antifa types who they're ready to do and face any consequence for their actions. They're ready to kill. They're ready to do prison time. They're ready to be killed by law enforcement. They are tried and true believers, down for the cause, and they're incredibly dangerous. And then you have sort of everyone else who will participate, help in the planning, but they're not built for federal prison, Liz. They're not built for federal prison. There was an example of this down in Portland with this guy who was masked up. He was like yay tall, masked up, screaming in the face of ICE agents on the line, acting real tough until he got arrested. And then he was in the ICE facility. You've probably seen the video. He's shaking. His mask is off and he is shaking.
He's like crying, isn't he?
He's like crying and shaking. And there's been many instances of that because once the mask comes off, some of them are just scared, little below average intelligence, loners who got caught up in a movement. And I guarantee that some of these unindicted co-conspirators fit into that mold.
Do they have the information though, even if they're the low intelligent sheep percentage of Antifa, do they have the information to give to the feds that will be helpful in dismantling the organization that is an organization?
Maybe not in every instance. Like if you just plucked a random one off the street in Portland, they might not know exactly everything. But in this instance, down in Texas, I think so. Because you saw how organized this was when they talked about the ammunition they would need, what kind of weapons they would need. My guess is there's some sort of, chat somewhere, logs that they have access to, that they were a part of as part of this operation. And yeah, I think that this was organized enough, or even if they were a lower on the totem pole, not an A-list Antifa, where they have the information to at least get the feds, a part of the way, or else why would the feds have made them unindicted co-conspirators if they didn't have enough information to make the case, to help them make the case that they wanted to make?
What percentage of Antifa do you think is the A-list, the very dangerous people who are willing to kill and be killed, versus the D-level sheep?
10%. I think 10% are true believers who will do anything for the cause. Kill, be killed, whatever it is. So I do believe that there is and that doesn't make the other people not dangerous. It does not make the other people not dangerous. I'm not saying they wouldn't kill for the cause. They're very quick to violence. They're quick to assault people like me in broad daylight. But once reality hits, and now you have an administration that is willing to charge these people federally and put them in prison for an extended period of time. There's been several dozen people who have been arrested down in Portland outside the ICE facility who are now facing actual consequences. And one other thing I want to note, and it's really important to understand the mindset, they haven't faced actual consequences, some of them ever. So, in Seattle for 15 years, whether it's from the Occupy movement, which was one of the real first exposures I had back in the early 2010s to this left-wing extremism. So we're going from the Occupy movement into, BLM, into the summer of 2020, the May Day riots, which we've had here. The amount of things they've gotten away with no consequence whatsoever, and really with kind of a passive support from Democratic leadership. Why would they not be emboldened? And so they're almost setting themselves up for this rude awakening because they got away with, vandalism. And then they get away with blocking freeways and blocking access to the airport. And they get away with assaulting journalists. They get away with assaulting police officers. And so now in their mind, they're invincible. And now they're going to FO down in Portland or whatever it is and do something that's going to land them in federal prison. And Democrats, set them up for that by making sure that they could get away with this for 15 years with no consequences whatsoever.
Yeah. Do you think if the 10% of those willing to kill and be killed who are the leadership, if those people are held accountable, taken off the streets, put in prison, obviously prosecuted, would the 90%, albeit dangerous, but sheep, would they dissipate?
Yeah, I think so. And it's really, when you go to Portland, Liz, you're smart. It would take you 5 minutes to figure out who the A-team is. 5 minutes. And there's also a
I
reason.
think you can tell from even photos sometimes.
Well, right. But there's also a reason. And actually, I have a group chat, and I was talking with Andy No, who, as you know, is sort of the godfather of covering Antifa. And one of the things that we've all collectively, I kind of noticed, those of us who've been on the ground in Portland, is the A team isn't showing up as much. And why do you think that is? Well, they're sending minions out to do, I think, some of their dirty work for them in light of what the federal government is sort of threatening. And I think that they're kind of taking a planning role behind the scenes, and they're sending out their foot soldiers, so to speak, to carry some of this out on their behalf. Because I will say, at the beginning, we saw more of these sort of A-list Antifa types than or A-team Antifa types than we have lately.